ready for our first keynote speaker. And, you know, part of the way that we were introduced to Dr. Marya is through our own professor of creative writing, Allison Hedgecoke. Allison Hedgecoke is an inspired and inspiring poet who addresses issues of culture, prejudice, indigenous rights, the environment, peace, violence, abuse, and labor, all through her poetry and other creative works. And so as a professor of our creative writing department, I wanted to just welcome her and have her introduce Dr. Marya.
Hi, welcome. It's a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Marya. She came in my life through an outreach regarding a poem and her own publications and led me through an illness that I had that was extremely devastating to me at the time. So I appreciate her to no end and have learned more and more about her since that time. Dr. Rupa Marya is a physician, an activist, a mother, and a composer, brilliant musician. She's an associate professor of medicine at the University of California, San Francisco, where she practices and teaches internal medicine. Her research focuses on the health impacts of racism and state violence. She's a co-founder of Do No Harm Coalition, a collective of health workers committed to addressing disease through structural change. At the invitation of Lakota health leaders, she is helping to set up the Minnewachuny Health Clinic farm at Standing Rock in order to decolonize medicine and food. She is also co-founder of the Deep Medicine Circle, an organization committed to healing the wounds of colonization through food, medicine, story, and learning. Working with her husband, an agricultural farmer, Benjamin Ferrer, an association of Ramaytush Ohlone. Sorry? She is part of Farming Medicine Project, where farmers are recast as ecological stewards on rematriated land, and food is liberated from the market economy. She has toured 29 countries with her band, Rupa and the April Fishes. They're fabulous. She's a wonderful singer, whose music was described by the legend Gil Scott-Heron as liberation music. Big fan of Gil Scott-Heron as well. Her book on the health impacts of colonization, Inflamed, Deep Medicine, and the Anatomy of Injustice, written with Raj Patel, will be out internationally in August this summer. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Rupa Marya.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you so much. And we are so honored to include your amazing poem, Pando Pando, in our book, which is it's the synthesis of everything that we are actually working on together, and understanding health as systems within systems, that everything is interconnected and that we can't talk about the health of one individual without talking about the health of the whole. So I'm gonna start today to talk about farming as medicine. Let's see, is this working? Screen share. Are we good? Okay, so I'm gonna share this talk with you today about farming as medicine. First, I want to acknowledge my own ancestors and the ancestors of the land that I'm speaking to you from. So I am from Punjab, India. My ancestors were warriors and farmers, healers, scientists, and artists. I was born in Ramaytush Ohlone land, where I work as a doctor now at UCSF. And I'm speaking to you today from the Ohlone territory of Huchin. This is known as Oakland. So I live in Oakland on a small urban farm with land that was brought together through our neighbors taking down our fences. I'm grateful to my ancestors for all the gifts they continue to bring to my life, and to the ancestors of this land who give me a safe place to grow up and to raise my children. I'm also grateful to the Ohlone people I've met and I organize with, who've become my good friends and who've guided my own unlearning and continue to help me situate my work in the most healing alignment. And I'm grateful to my husband, Benjamin Farr, who is a farmer, for bringing the magic of soil and seeds into my life, and for really inspiring me to take my work down to the ground, my healing understanding. So what we have bared witness to in this past year alone is showing us that there's a system with frayed edges and dysfunction. It is a system that requires desperation to function. Our desperation, our vulnerabilities, and our violence have been exposed in ways that are irrefutable. The lines of power sharply drawn across the bodies of Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities have come into sharp focus. From police violence to wildfire smoke to lungs inflamed with COVID, the resounding chorus of this time is "I can't breathe." COVID has shown us an unimaginable cruelty that is required for this society to run. It is showing a society obsessed with growth, where time, money, and energy are not allocated to center care. It is showing us what happens when people are left behind and when we pretend that we are separate from the web of life and from each other. It is showing us that when we center profit over safety, health, and well-being, ultimately we all will fail. These are mink who are caged and raised only to harvest their skin. At least 17 million had to be killed in Denmark because of COVID infection. We have watched as the ugliness of this nation revealed itself again, hardly a surprise to those of us who have to contend with it every day. We have buried our elders who took with them their stories, their languages, and their wisdom. We have shouldered the brunt of these multiple pandemics. As we sit together now with 500,000 people dead in the US alone, it is time for us to reimagine what the future can be and to look unflinchingly at what life around us is saying to create another way forward. Our systems and imaginings of health that we have had to date are not sufficient. What has become abundantly clear is that we can no longer pretend to look at systems in isolation and hope to make things better. We cannot talk about soil health without contending with the legacies of genocide of Indigenous people and the destruction of the ecosystems that they tended. We cannot talk about farming without talking about stolen labor and why so many Black and Brown farmers or people have been denied land ownership or had it taken from them, as is the case with Japanese farmers here in California. We cannot talk about agriculture without talking about our own health and the health of the planet. Everything is inextricably tangled up in a web of relations. Today, I speak to you from the culmination of my experience as a hospital medicine doctor who has been on the front lines of healthcare for the past 19 years at UCSF, and as a musician who has traveled around the world to examine the impact of social forces on health, as a mother, as a farmer's wife, and as someone who loves a good story. And I have a story to share with you. It is my story. It is the story of how a doctor started to notice health problems and their connection to the living systems that were dysregulated around her. It is a story of investigating health deeply, down to the very fibers of our social fabric and the cosmologies that we have not chosen and that we are forced to operate under. It is the story of a doctor who married a farmer and started reading his soil microbiology reports, noticing how similar they were to ones she was seeing from stool cultures of her patients with inflammatory bowel disease. She started to make the connection that the earth was a body like her own, and the soil was a gut, the place where nutrient cycling was occurring, where immunity was supported. It is the story of a doctor who has decided to become a farmer, and how this move has been guided by patients and their stories. Taking care of people when they are sick has been one of my life's greatest privileges. And if you listen carefully, people will often tell you why they got sick. Their stories have propelled my own investigations into why we are all getting sick in the ways that we are. Like Lorenzo, whose name, like other patients mentioned here, has been changed to protect his privacy. He was 36 years old when he was admitted to UCSF. He grew up the child of Mexican immigrants and worked as a groundskeeper in a school in the Central Valley, putting Roundup on the grounds to control the weeds. An avid athlete, Lorenzo developed a gnawing back pain and knew something was wrong. After several scans and tests, he was diagnosed with the most aggressive form of colon cancer I have ever seen. The last week of his life, I was working to match blood transfusions with the quickening pace of the bleeding from his tumor. Eventually, we couldn't keep up and the cancer took his life only 4 months after diagnosis. Colorectal cancer is becoming much more prevalent in younger and younger people, and it is now the leading cause of cancer death in people under 50. As with all diseases in a racist society, mortality disproportionately impacts Black and Indigenous people. Changes in the gut microbiome are contributing to this trend, as are multiple exposures. Then there's the story of Sarah, who was 50 years old and admitted with a severe gastroenteritis caused by the dreaded bacteria Clostridium difficile. This organism is the most common healthcare-associated infection in the US and causes life-threatening diarrhea. We usually see it when someone has had a round of antibiotics where their normal gut flora die and leave spaces for pathogens like C. diff to proliferate. We also see it in people who are hospitalized repeatedly or who live in a nursing home. What was striking about Sarah's case is that she had no prior antibiotic use and no prior hospitalization. She got C. diff in the community. In the mid-2000s, we started noticing more cases of community-acquired C. diff. This bacteria is ubiquitous. It lives in the soil and in the guts of other animals. I remember that C. diff is one of those organisms that remain in the soil after it was treated with glyphosate or Roundup. I started to wonder if we were cultivating these organisms in the soil with our farming practices. Was the way that we were treating our livestock making C. diff more prevalent? In fact, a few studies had confirmed that living close to a farm is a risk factor for getting C. diff out in the community. Overuse of antibiotics in livestock is leading to high levels in animal manure that eventually ends up in the dust in our homes if we live near a farm or in our food. We also must investigate if the use of pesticides such as glyphosate is concentrating levels in the soil. Our health is being impacted by our land use and our farming practices here in California and around the world. And our health is being impacted in a very patterned way. All of the most prevalent diseases in cultures that employ modern industrial farming techniques are diseases where inflammation plays a critical role. Even with COVID, whether you live or die is dependent on how inflamed you become. This inflammation is occurring in response to the world around us. It is not something an individual can change by making different lifestyle changes or shopping changes. An organic produce section or a farmer's market won't make this any better. This is how the human body has evolved to respond to the structures around us. But this simply isn't about farming. It's about a mindset that leads to farming in a certain way. It's about a society structured through that mindset that values extraction over every other thing. Extraction of resources, extraction of food, extraction of labor. And we can trace the origins of this mindset back to a time and a place. And I noticed that this is a similar mindset that developed in medicine around the same time and place. While farming and medicine both have roots that stretch back thousands of years, the version that we practice today at large have some recent common roots dating about 600 years ago, with the birth of capitalism and the colonial structures that were necessary to offer up stolen land and stolen labor to make capitalism work. Farming and medicine were both parts of the colonizing of these lands, which involved destroying traditional relationships between people and their ecologies and replacing them with extractive ones that served colonial ends. In today's universities, farming and medicine are taught through an ahistorical lens, which hides the legacies of land theft, genocide, and labor theft that their industries required to exist in these territories. The training is science-based, but only selectively so, focusing on science that advances its agendas rather than interrogating its assumptions of power. Both farming and medicine had their education and policy shaped by philanthrocapitalists, people who stood to gain by donating huge sums to alter the ways in which we learn and practice. In medicine, the Rockefellers and Carnegie were obsessed with the potential for fossil fuels to generate pharmaceuticals. They had supported the work of Abram Flexner, who wrote a damning report in 1910 that led to the shutting down of many schools of medicine in the US, including most Black medical colleges and medical schools that taught things like herbal indigenous medicine. Around the turn of the 20th century, medicine here was eclectic, with different traditions all equal in the same marketplace. Flexner's report ensured that any medical college that taught herbalism or acupuncture was shut down, forcing all education and licensing to follow a particular science-based path. I spent hours learning biochemistry that I have never applied in the care of patients. Farming also received this special treatment, with the Rockefellers investing heavily in the Green Revolution that would alter the face of the earth with vast amounts of pesticides and petrochemical inputs into our food system. This problem continues today as Bill Gates is now the largest owner of farmland on planet Earth. The result, which was planned and manufactured, is that our industries have a lot of fossil fuel-based inputs. If you're getting the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine, COVID vaccine, it contains some polyethylene glycol, a food-safe antifreeze developed from petroleum. When you take a dose of Miralax, you're addressing your constipation with that same substance. For farmers, they are taught that applied chemistry is a necessary component of the food system. This mindset cultivates dependencies on inputs instead of working with biological systems to enhance immunity, health, and vitality. It also creates damages on our earth and in our societies, as we see with the recent opiate epidemic. We have lost our imaginations for how to deeply heal ourselves and care for the land that our lives depend on. In medicine and in farming, the entities we are interacting with, viewed through this scientific lens, are inert. The patient is a machine with broken parts that needs to be repaired, who can be fixed as a sole individual. The soil is an inert substance after the petrochemical inputs have killed the biology that lives in it, and we simply replace what we think is needed because somehow we know better than microbes that have evolved over billions of years. Which brings me to my next point, which is our shared colonial capitalist cosmology, where fabricated hierarchies structure our society. Systems of domination that put humans over living entities, including the soil and water. It puts people of European ancestry over all other people, cis hetero men over all other expressions of humanity, one religion over all other worldviews, private property over all other expressions of being on land. This structuring is a necessary part of cultivating the desperation needed for this system to function. This dividing allows for the exploitation to occur. Both farming and medicine have been structured to value productivity over care, to generate profits rather than vitality and health. This is why you might not feel healed after you go visit the doctor, and why people are getting sick from the foods we are eating, and why the climate is becoming more unstable from the ways we are interacting with the earth. Both systems reflect a deep distrust in life's intelligence and the relationships necessary to benefit from it. This distrust is not an accident. It is required to leave us all desperate and dependent on external inputs we have been led to believe we need, but we don't need them. What we need is to immerse ourselves in life's intelligence. And there is no better place to get a close-up look at life's intelligence than zooming in on our microbes. The most successful living creatures on Earth in terms of sheer number, adaptability, and longevity are microbes. Bacteria, fungi, archaea, and viruses. It took a virus, SARS-CoV-2, to show us that we can pause and deeply reimagine our future. Totally underrated in the climate discussion, microbes are responsible for most of the world's carbon and nitrogen cycling. Our food system would collapse without them, regardless of what Fritz Haber might say. Haber was the first person to fix nitrogen without the use of microbes. This led to the development of several chemical weapons, as well as nitrogen fertilizer, which has been a mainstay of industrial agriculture and the scourge of coral reefs around the world. Non-biological nitrogen has given humans the escape velocity to sever our connection to the web of life. It is the wound that we must repair. The human microbiome, all the creatures that live on us and in us, is made up of trillions of organisms, some of them vital to our health and some of them just along for the ride. Whereas we humans have 20,000 protein encoding genes, these, the same as a little fruit fly, our microbes have at least 200 million, and some of them are critical for our health. The gut microbiome, what lives inside our intestines, sits at the crossroads of vital pathways for neurological, endocrine, and immune development. They train these systems to operate optimally. Enzymes from these microbes are able to digest foods that we can't, and the byproducts that they produce can be beneficial for our health or harmful, depending on what we eat and what genes they possess. For example, microbes can break down plant fibers and create short-chain fatty acids, which have multiple anti-inflammatory health benefits. Our microbiome is formed early in life. As early as 14 weeks in utero, we can begin to see early clusters of bacteria in the folds of developing babies' intestines. They appear to be busy training the immune system to tolerate the passengers who will live inside us and confer us with incredible and vital health benefits. When we are born through the vagina, we get the biggest inoculation of our microbes from our mothers. Breastfeeding selects for bacteria that create metabolic products that are critical for establishing the immune system's tone and setting up a pattern of immune health. As we grow older, what we feed our gut microbes and what we are exposed to shapes the gut microbiome, which is constantly changing in relationship to the foods that we eat and the environment around us. Plant-based diets like the Mediterranean diet lead to our microbes creating more short-chain fatty acids, which counter inflammation. Animal protein-based diets actually do the opposite, with microbes creating metabolic products that drive inflammation. Dietary chemicals can strip the microbiome altogether. So in fact, you are what your microbes eat. But it isn't just diet that impacts how the microbes we carry will help or hinder our health. The biodiversity of the microbiome also matters. Most diseases of inflammation are associated with a microbiome that lacks biodiversity. And what causes the biodiversity to drop is a function of multiple exposures. In fact, it is the exposome, which is the sum of our lifetime exposures, which starts with what our mothers were exposed to, actually what our great-grandmothers are exposed to. It includes everything from how walkable a city is to our lifestyle choices like diet and smoking. It includes how much money we make, how much debt we carry, what chemicals we are exposed to. It includes how stressed we are, our stories, the structures of power we are subjected to, including racism, sexism, ableism, and caste. Our cosmologies and stories are also a part of our exposome, how we understand the world, how safe we perceive it to be, and what our role is in it. We are learning that certain exposomes are highly inflammatory, where racism, debt, chemical exposure, and processed foods all add up to create a potent mix. Here, the immune system is not dysregulated. It is reacting appropriately to a damaging world. Those exposomes that denude our microbial biodiversity are removing one of the most effective defenses against inflammation. And there are other exposomes that promote it. When we look at the gut microbiome of different communities around the world, we find that indigenous people living traditional lifestyles have the most biodiverse gut on the planet. And they also do not suffer the modern diseases of inflammation. So you can see here, the top green line is the Yanomami indigenous people of the Amazon. And the bottom yellow line is the US. And how tall that line is indicates how biodiverse those microbes are. Actually, on planet Earth, the people with the least biodiverse guts on Earth are US urban dwellers. The rates of heart disease, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune disease in traditional living indigenous cultures are all still very low. Age-related hypertension, an expected outcome of aging in industrialized societies whose slope starts increasing when kids go to school, is also non-existent in those cultures. These indigenous groups possess some ancestral strains of microbes that are excellent at quelling inflammation. These strains actually don't exist in modern industrialized people. Taking a pill to inoculate ourselves won't work because everything around us will strip them. These microbes require a certain environment to thrive, and that's not one that contains PFAS, deforestation, and rampant white supremacy. When it comes to these superorganisms, we have lost touch with these ancestors. Indigenous people are not only tending the most biodiversity inside their bodies, they're also tending most of the Earth's entire biodiversity outside their bodies. They are masters at harmonizing ecological systems. This isn't because they have some special sauce. We all come from indigenous tribes somewhere back in our lineage. Before Hinduism, before Christianity, before these systems developed that would seek to concentrate power into fewer and fewer hands. Their mastery, because of their worldview, their cosmology that centers relationship and care. The cosmology that has structured this society is characterized by systems of domination, and the outcome is damage and inflammation. We cannot hope to tweak one little area and think we can gain ground in transforming outcomes. We must wholly take on the entire worldview, which leads me to my next question. As we face the challenges in the 21st century, we must get really real with ourselves. A softer, gentler colonialism or a fuzzy, greener capitalism cannot give us the outcomes we need to secure the health of future generations. Having Black and brown leadership in systems that are inherently structured to oppress people of color will not adequately bring about the kinds of transformation we need in the exposome to get better health. What we need is another mindset. And lucky for you, I spent the last year detailing what that looks like. And this book will come out, like Allison said, this August. I had the opportunity to write with my dear friend and amazing writer and systems thinker, Raj Patel. So I look forward to sharing, we actually just turned it in on Monday, so I'm still recovering. I look forward to sharing the incredible teachings we have gathered from all of our Indigenous friends, farmers, activists, scholars, and frontline warriors that we spoke with around the world. We write about several kinds of deep medicine to address the challenges we face. And one of the most important, because it frames how we care, is agroecology. Because in agroecology, there is a centering of care that is centering that, and that centering is not on the self or the individual. Care of the self actually occurs by way of caring for the other, by tending the soil and the relationships around it, by giving it what it needs to thrive. The plants we will grow in it will thrive, and we will thrive as an outcome. When we realize that land is alive and land has memory, we can understand how the traumas on that land become compounded and transmitted through disrupted ecology, creating a framework for inflammation to rage unabated on the land, between us, and in our very bodies. One only needs to look at a patch of earth over a period of time to understand how the structures imposed on it transform the very composition of the soil in the same way that the structures imposed on us transform our bodies. Some of the oldest artifacts in the California Central Valley date back to 13,500 years ago, around the end of the last ice age. Over the next several thousand years, life flourished, with large herds of tule elk and pronghorn roaming a central corridor that was cultivated by the original gardeners, grizzly bears, whose feces left trails of berry seeds and loads of phosphorus from the salmon they fished and ate from the rivers. Villages of indigenous Yokut people thrived with plenty of building materials and diversity of food to support life in balance for thousands of years, demonstrating a technical sophistication in sustainable living that has never been manifested by any of the most recent settlers on this land. When the first Spanish came to the San Joaquin Valley in 1770, the area was home to some of the most densely inhabited places in pre-contact Native America, with bands of Yokut creating networks of villages and trade routes with their coastal contemporaries here in Ohlone territory. Before the Spanish arrived, they had diverse diets, hunting ducks, geese, and other waterfowl and collecting their eggs, eating turtles, small animals, fish and shellfish, tule elk and pronghorn and deer. Tule reeds, which were used as a building material for mats and boats and huts, also nourished the people with their roots and seeds. The Yokut also ate wild grapes and blackberries and elderberries and acorn. They collected red made and clarkia seeds in the spring and sunflower seeds in the summer. They understood that they were part of their environment, this oak grassland savanna, not separate from it. And through the tending of their foodways and medicine ways, they maintained vibrant ecologies until the Spanish came. Actually, when the Spanish arrived, they commented on the robust physique and inherent health of the indigenous people of this land. The topsoils at that time were also robust, so 24 feet deep topsoils, a microbial bonanza from millennia of thriving ecosystems with people, elk, grizzly, salmon, geese, grasses, and fungi, all a part of this living engine. A few short decades after Spanish arrival, the villages were abandoned as the colonizers forced the indigenous people off of their land and into the missions. The health of the Yokut rapidly declined. Many of them died from infectious diseases due to exposures brought by the new settlers. to which native people were immunologically naive. However, one has to wonder if their lack of ability to endure those exposures was not simply that their bodies saw new germs, but because of the trauma they had endured and their physical removal from the microbial milieu where their bodies had been in relationship over 10,000 years. And through that forced removal, they were left immunologically weakened, allowing these exposures to have more impact in decimating their people. Displacement was then, as it is today, an act of genocide. In fact, the soil was their lifeline. The land that once held an entire lineage of people and a diverse population of species as a part of the landscape became parceled and harnessed for agriculture. In the latter half of the 19th century, the state of California enacted genocidal tactics on the native people, offering 25 cents a scalp and $5 a head, with several state-sponsored massacres against indigenous population for the purpose of clearing the land for colonizers. The Tule elk population of almost 500,000 who roamed the valley was reduced to 28 due to European and early American slaughter. The grizzly had been pushed to extinction by 1920. Then came the industrialization of agriculture. All of these events led us to where we are today. Industrial agriculture with its fossil fuel-derived pesticides and fertilizer has been catastrophic for the soil microbiome. With the death of that complex food web, the eventual casualty has become us, because our bodies need the rich biodiversity of microorganisms for optimal health. The topsoil in this region that was once 24 feet when the colonizers arrived is now only 2 to 6 feet deep, a devastating loss of generations on top of generations living knowledge. This destructive pattern of incessant assault on soil can be seen around the world, where indigenous people have been forced off lands they stewarded and natural systems have been exploited out of balance. This is the pattern that drives the fire of inflammation. To undo the mindset that got us here, we must start with repairing broken relationships with each other and with the land. We must abolish damaging systems. Just as our bodies hold trauma and remember, impacting our immune systems for generation, the land holds trauma and remembers. We must start our healing of the soil simultaneously with the healing of our relationships. What do some of these best practices look like? We must maximize soil microbiology, abundance and diversity. And we must also maximize land back, giving land back to our indigenous friends and entering correct relationship. We are guests on their land. We must minimize soil disturbance, and we must minimize the racist exclusion of brown and Black people from participating with power in these systems. We must increase mass and quality of plant and animal biology, and we must increase cooperative ownership, dismantling those systems of capitalism that keep groups pitted against each other and concentrate wealth and power in increasingly fewer hands. For soil to benefit, there should be continuous living plant coverage. And for us to benefit, there must be continuous care for each other. In order for this work to be possible, we must refuse to participate in systems that require constant growth, ones that demand profitability. We must start building systems that allow for this circular flow of wealth and health between our planet, our societies, and all living creatures. This schematic I find very helpful in this imagining. It is from Kate Raworth's book, Donut Economics. It's a good read. And how do we do this work? Well, I organize with farmers. So when farmers speak, power listens. We organize together. We organize in our communities. And for doctors and healthcare workers, that means we organize with our patients and the people in our communities who are suffering. We start creating stronger ties in our communities to force this agenda. This is a shout out to the farmers in India, my people, Punjabi people, who are showing us how power will ultimately cave to massive organizing. Farmers control the food system. Ultimately, none of us can live without those who grow the food. This is a tremendous leveraging point. The road ahead is not easy and not simple, but it is possible with perseverance and community. The story of a doctor who becomes a farmer is not a solution to our problems. No individual story is, and it never can be. It is our collective work together that will get us to where we need to be, to ensure a livable and vibrant planet for our great-grandchildren. I look forward to building more community ties with you and Riverside and with our farming communities. As a doctor turned farmer who will be there with my hands in the dirt, looking under the microscope at the soil, learning alongside all of you in this time of great reckoning and turning. And my learning and unlearning is continuing here in Ramaytush Ohlone territory, where I was born, where my grandfather died, and where my sons arrived. Together, with Jonathan Cordero and Greg Castro, tribal chair and culture bearer, we are engaging with the Peninsula Open Space Trust to get 38 acres of farmland back into the hands of Ramaytush Ohlone so that they can start their healing. And we have learned that we are getting this land. So tomorrow we have a big meeting. We're very excited. This would be their first land holding in their traditional homeland since the genocide. It is an honor to work with them to advance their ancestral responsibilities, to continue their culture, to take care of the earth, and to take care of all the people living there. By correcting our relationships and entering this work as farmers on Indigenous people, we start in the right manner. The food that is grown here will be medicine. This project is joining together several entities, the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone with Top Leaf Farms, which is an urban rural agroecological business I founded with my husband, who is a farmer, Benjamin Farr. We're also working with Luna Vase Farms, run by my brother, Rupa Marya, and Sofia Poblana Hoshino. They're currently operating a CSA to support local BIPOC farmers in the Bay Area. We are working with the Deep Medicine Circle, an entity we are creating to do this work of healing the wounds of colonialism through food, medicine, story, and learning and unlearning. Farming is Medicine, this project starts with land rematriation back into the hands of the original people from who it was stolen so that the healing can start. We will offer salaries to BIPOC farmers independent of how much food they produce, reframing them as ecological stewards, their primary work being to care for the soil and the water. We will grow diverse crops using agroecological methods with a long-range production cycles to support restoring soil, building up water, and revitalizing the wild edges. This healthy food is then liberated from the market economy and will go to area food hubs. We are participating with the American Indian Cultural District in San Francisco and the UCSF Food Pharmacy. And we're also exploring a partnership with the Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation, who are a low-income nonprofit housing corporation in San Francisco. They are making a storefront so their members can get food without the exchange of money. Their work is being supported by the sugary drinks tax, which I don't know if you all have down there, but we've had a couple of them up here in Oakland and San Francisco, and they have raised millions of dollars more than what's anticipated. So if you all don't have that down there, you should get yourself a sugary drinks tax. These food hubs will give away the food to those who need it most, those whose exposomes are toxic from the creation of poverty and racism. Our plan includes creek restoration with support for bringing back the salmon. We're also hoping we can bring back a beaver, and education of urban Indian youth to form an urban rural corridor that links farms we are building on rooftops in the urban environment with this rural project. Our goal is to teach the next generation of farmers how to grow food at multiple scales while simultaneously supporting a thriving surrounding ecology. And we will watch the outcomes to share with the healing with our community and the data with our local policymakers. We will be engaging in healing around the land and with storytelling as medicine. So there's a California Native Storytelling Festival that Greg Castro has hosted. So we'll bring that back to life on the farm. We will be evaluating farmer happiness, stress, and health, and watching the soil to see what happens when you treat it with this kind of love and respect, and watching the water in the creek to see what happens when you treat it with love and respect. And I think we'll be able to measure our success through the salmon. We will also be evaluating what happens to our community members up in San Francisco who will have no barrier access to this food. We believe that the food system can be transformed by scaling these kinds of small projects, not in size, but by staying small and implementing new economic models that prioritize care, of the earth, of the people, of the salmon, of the water. We would love to see 100 such small farms go up all over Ohlone territory. Learning from COVID, which spread around the entire planet, we hope to scale our work like a virus. And the next phase of our work is with our Ohlone friends. We are actually going to be fundraising for them to purchase 640 acres across the street. This would be the site of their homecoming. We are developing a shared vision that includes land management through agroforestry, maintaining wildlife corridors, the creation of a village, a place for BIPOC people to heal their wounded severance to land, an agroecological center to participate in the global dialogue around land-based and seed-based pedagogies, and a healing center to decolonize food and medicine. I never realized that my life would take me down this path of making clinics happen, but it is. And this is such an amazing road that I'm walking. Apparently stewarding clinics into being is part of my work. And I was honored to be invited to do this in Lakota, Dakota, Nakota territory after the DAPL camp came down in Standing Rock. That work is well underway with the leadership of tribal health workers Tasha Peltier and Elena Eagleshield at the helm. This clinic is entering a novel partnership with a tribally owned wind farm. It will be the first wind-funded free clinic to decolonize medicine in this land. It's an innovative example of what we can do to reimagine our systems that serve us instead of injure us. The same idea I think of when I think of the Torres Martinez folks down in your zones down there, because the Salton Sea is the largest reservoir, I think, of lithium in the world. And I know that the California governor and the California government is looking into extraction there. That money that is made off of electrifying our state should go directly to benefiting our indigenous people. So in order for health to be possible for all being, we must radically transform our world. And farming is a great way to do that, because our food and how we grow it ends up becoming part of who we are. So we must rematriate the land, give it back to indigenous people, and follow their leadership. We must reintegrate farming into the web of life and get away from this industrial model, because it's truly killing us and the planet. We must liberate farmers from the market economy. When you look at how COVID has really thrived in these places of desperation, our farm workers have been so deeply impacted by COVID. And we need to create a system where those people are not so desperate to work under suboptimal conditions. We need to value care and thriving over production. We need to dismantle white supremacy in the food system and all systems. And we need to feed all the people with fossil fuel-free food. We need a declaration of rights of soil, water, and air. These are my prescriptions. I hope you're all taking notes. And we need to recognize that soil health is human health. Reframing farmers and farm workers as the principal stewards of our health and entering dynamic and engaging partnerships with them as health workers is really a great way to start that work. That is all I have to say for right now, and I'm happy to take questions. Let's see. Are we all there? We're there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rupa. That was fantastic. That was a lot to digest as well. Good medicine to digest. We have a question in the chat, and then if anyone else has a question, you know how to do your raise hands on the side. So I'll just start with the question in the chat, if that's all right. Okay, so amazing work with return to land that has been abused for over decades plus to regenerative farming. Do you anticipate working with nutrient cycling microbes, fungi, and agents of bioremediation prior to food production to protect food consumers from phytoextraction?
Yes.
The anthropologist, yeah. Or yes. Do you envision happening simultaneously with agroecological processes?
That's a great question. So how do we heal? And I think it depends on how toxic the land is. So in India, the land is so toxic and the water table is so poisoned that there's an entire train called the cancer train that takes peasant farmers from one state to the next state for healing or for cancer treatment. And so I think it depends on how abused the soil is, but I think that cover cropping, starting with cover cropping, covering the soil, and focusing on healing the soil as opposed to extracting from it is probably the first step. And absolutely, remediation through fungi and through microbes would be absolutely a critical piece of this work. But I should also mention that that requires dismantling how we are doing things as a state. So if the state would say, oh, we can't produce almonds for the world if we have to take things out of production, we have to start thinking, do we want to be creating almonds for the world as a state? Or do we want to start taking care of our 43 million acres to protect California, for example, to protect the people here? So much water leaves our state through our agricultural products that get shipped abroad. And that water could be repurposed to be available for us and to create less drought-like conditions throughout our state. I think about 80% of the water in California is used for agriculture.
Great, thank you. Do we have another question?
Are your points of view integrated into medical schools so that medical students can understand? Well, my medical students, okay, are my points of view being integrated into medical schools so that medical students can understand new ways of seeing their world and the connections to the soil, for example? This should be, I think this, my book should be required reading. I feel, for us to be on the same page. So at UCSF, our students are very blessed to have several faculty very interested in this work. There's Daphne Miller, who wrote a great book called Pharmacology. She's not as diehard as I am in actually it's the system that led to the soil damage. You can't just fix the soil damage without fixing the mentality that brought that damage. But she is talking about the soil health and recognizing that, we can't be healthy if our soil's not healthy. Vincent Adams is another professor at UCSF who's doing great work in anthropology and sociology. And she's actually coming out with a whole book on glyphosate, I think later this year, Roundup, and its impacts on our health and how Black and brown people are most disproportionately impacted by the toxicities. So I think that this kind of work you're going to find it in places where doctors are hanging out with farmers. And I married one. So if you're in healthcare and you want, you're single, I highly recommend marrying someone who's working with the dirt right now, because not only will you have food security in times of climate crisis, but you'll have a diverse perspective on what health really is. Because we know that here in America, everything is about the almighty dollar, and so many of the solutions you name require money. What else do you recommend be done? So for example, we just are getting 38 acres rematriated to our Ramaytush Ohlone friends. They, the organization that owns the land has said, well, should we help you raise $400,000 to give the land back? And I said, that's like asking people to pay for their reparations. So India, my country, $42 trillion was extracted from my country from colonialism. That was extraction of our labor and extraction of our diamonds and our gold and our spices and our everything. So that extractive mentality, and then you look at India and it's having to pay debts to the World Bank. It's like, no, what we need is a global reparations. That colonialism has happened for 600 years, and it's a system of impoverishing people, and not just abroad, but impoverishing people here. So I don't think we need money so much as we need organizing, because that kind of change can happen if we insist upon it. as we collectively say, actually, we're done with being sick in this way. We're done with the cancer in this way. I can give you insulin, but I can't stop your diabetes from happening. The way I can stop your diabetes happening is to stop poisoning the water and stop poisoning the land and stop traumatizing the people, especially the brown and Black people. And so if we want to talk about health disparities, we can talk about it all day long, and I can point to all the charts about how bad it is for people with this much melanin in their skin, but that's not going to do what needs to be done. What needs to be done is systematic transformational change, and that requires organizing. And for healthcare workers, that means you organize outside of the healthcare system. You organize with community members. And then once you've gotten those community members, you start organizing with your friends in healthcare, because healthcare actually is a part of the problem. And I say that because healthcare was a tool of colonizing this land, and that all of us in medicine are part of the colonial medical system. And that's something you can, I hope you will read this book, because it'll give you a chance to imagine a new way of being a medicine person in this land. How would you go about having us research dismantling white supremacy within food systems? That's a great question. So, anthropologists, economists, political scientists? No, I would go to the people working the land. So most of our food system is run by people of color, lots of indigenous people from Central America, lots of folks from south of the border. I would work with them. And I would work with the people who are closest to the land and hear how they think the system should be reformed and changed, and then start organizing with them. That's how I would do it. And it's good to meet with political people and economists. It's good to have a wide variety of worlds that you walk in, especially people who are growing in their careers. I think it's actually very beneficial to, sit with the governor's people and sit with the farm workers and learn, especially in healthcare, to be that bridge, because the great democracy of the real democracy is our bodies. Is that we all will get sick. We all were born. We all will get sick. We all will die. And that is like the humbling democracy. And so with that knowledge as a healthcare worker, you can operate in many different, the language of medicine and the language of health is something that can be very helpful. But in terms of the food system, I organize with farmers and indigenous people. Thank you for your kind words. Does your work also focus on livestock practices and how animals like cows have a huge negative impact on land? Yeah, the cows. So on our work with our Ramaytush friends across the street from the farm, where we're going to be starting to work in this April, we, across the street, we've discovered this is an Ohlone village, an ancient Ohlone village. And there are archaeological sites all over this 500,000 acres across the street. And that 5,000 acres is actually there's like hundreds of cattle on that land being ranged. And the erosion gullies that you see and the barrenness of the land is tragic. So one of the first things that our friends will be doing when they find that land in their hands is to remove the cows and to reintroduce the redwood and the dogbane and the native grasses and the other animals that were there. So the ranging of, let's say, for example, the Tule elk, who were the disturbance regime in Ohlone territory, they require like a 5-mile wide corridor to range. So it's really hard to get that in the San Francisco Peninsula. So our animals have been incarcerated. Our animals and the way we treat our cows is just not in respect with life. And so, yes, I think that is also a part of the problem. Anything else?
There's one question in the general chat, and I love that people have been direct messaging you their questions.
Sorry.
So.
Oh yeah, here we got one. What simple veggies to plant do you recommend in your backyard? Oh, this is a great question. Well, we learned that even with, let's say, contamination in our soil of something like lead, which is present in our urban environment, leafy greens don't get into the lead. But to be safe, if you're in a highly dense urban environment, I would make a raised bed and build up new soil. We have growing in our little farm right now. Some of my favorite things we grow are raspberries and strawberries, because they keep coming back. They're perennial. And strawberries, also the leaves make great tea, and it's a heart tonic. It's a great heart tonic. Sorry, my kids are running around. And then asparagus and artichoke are also nice plants because they're perennial and they're easy. Asparagus takes like a couple of years to get started, but once it starts, you just keep going every day in the spring and you've got asparagus for dinner. We also have lots of baby lettuces. If you're looking for a good seed supplier, I like Johnny's. They're great organic seed suppliers. Other veggies I like to grow. I love herbs so that I can always go out into my garden and make a tea. So I have calendula growing, which is nice for the butterflies and the bees. I have lemon balm growing. I have lemon verbena and mint. Mint will take over your yard. But it's great because you can just go out and gather it. I have dill and chives and parsley. So I almost never buy herbs. And once you get used to farming, we also have chickens here. Once you get used to starting to tend the land and growing your food, you go to the store and you're like, oh man, mine is so much better. Like I would never eat that like 3-day-old lettuce. Like I eat vibrant, beautiful lettuce. And so I highly recommend, even if you can only keep a little bit, like grow some peppers this year. Start with something easy like peppers or tomatoes. And then do some reading online. There's great resources to learn to grow your food. And when you do that, it will really stimulate your respect for people who do this work. Anything else? Oh. What types of fertilizers do I use? Okay, that's great. Yes. So when we started making synthetic fertilizer, again, like I said, we had this escape velocity where humans were no longer dependent on the microbes to fix the nitrogen. Microbes in our soil take inorganic nitrogen and fix it into organic nitrogen so our bodies can use it. We use, so we brew a compost tea every 2 or 3 days. My husband takes soil, puts it in a giant tea bag, sticks it in a big vat of water and spins it around. And then by the morning, it's like this bubbly, vibrant thing. That's like a kombucha. He calls it kombucha for the plants. So we spray the plants with that every few days. And then we use chicken manure. So we have chickens and we eat their eggs and we feed them well. We feed them with the kitchen scraps and we feed them with the vegetation that we're not going to eat. And then we take their manure and we can spread it on the farm. Can you speak more about how biodiversity tempers inflammation? I love thinking about the gut microbiome analogy and I'd like to hear more. Yes. Okay. So the biodiversity of the gut so the gut microbiome science is still very new, and we're understanding that it's not just certain microbes that are helpful. So you can't go, oh, I'll just have a little bit more of Privitella and I'll be fine, or a little bit more of this bacteria. It's the whole ecosystem, and it's the things around us that affect it. So stress, for example, if you're really stressed, you might notice that you get more sensitive in your gut, like maybe you'll have more diarrhea if you're stressed. That is caused by a disruption of the gut microbiome. The gut microbes are not as healthy and robust, and they don't protect the lining of the intestine the way that they do when you're not stressed. So things like stress and dietary emulsifiers, things like chemicals in the air or in your water, these things all impact the gut microbiome. And the reason why it's important to understand that is that the social engineering of brown and Black people being in neighborhoods where they're most exposed to that stuff means that their health toxicity is it's actually engineered. And so instead of just working in the clinic to like patch up their poor health, we have to start dismantling the systems of white supremacy that keep them in those places. We must demand their right to health and demand their right to clean air and clean water. There should be no corporation that profits off of the poor health of brown and Black people. That is the way this country has been built. That is the way this country has continued, and that is what needs to stop. And so that is my frustration with health disparities work, is that we can name the disparities, but we don't yet get to the like real point of interventions, which is to, you know, radically change a toxic system. And I could probably speak to for an hour about that, but I think we're done. Let's see here. Demanding the right to health. How do we move the needle to abolish racial capitalism? Well, probably one of the best ways is we can go on strike. We can withhold our labor and start putting our labor into alternative economic systems. That's how I would do it, and how I'm trying to do it. Do it with me. Let's do it together. None of us can do this alone. We have to do it together. So that is probably the most critical takeaway I hope you get, is that you shouldn't feel disempowered by this. You should feel empowered to collectively organize with your friends, create mutual aid societies, create cooperative organizations, create your own free clinics, and just do it. Because once we build enough of these alternative structures and don't participate in that economic system, it's not that we'll go and tear it down, it's that we will have created something much better. And that is absolutely what we have to do.
I want to thank you, Dr. Marya. This was so amazing and just on topic for the range of things that we need to explore more. The structure, you know, decolonizing medicine, structural racism, and how, you know, our Center for Health Disparities Research can move into really that kind of change that needs to occur so we can be well. And then I also think about the other piece of your talk around the clinic, and, you know, so decolonizing medicine and bringing it then into the clinic and to change those structures as well. And that's an area that, you know, we really want to expand on, and, you know, especially with our med school and, you know, starting our students off thinking this way. So thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. There's so much more, and I look forward to reading your book and all the other recommendations. And I hope that you will come and share with us some more, because we love the collaboration, and that is the other key piece of what you've done, the collaboration to make the change that we want to see. So.
Thank you. Thank you for your generosity in having me. Thank you to Allison for inviting me. And thank you for doing this work that you're doing. And I would love to partner in any way. Let's do this. Let's build these models and let's inspire our students. And it's time. It's past time. We don't have time. It's time. So let's get to work and do this. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
All right.
Brilliant.
So with that inspiring talk, the last phase or last part of this evening for our first day, we want to have some breakout groups where we get to talk about what Dr. Marya just shared with us. You know, sort of what does it mean as we think about structural racism and decolonizing research? Not just decolonizing medicine, but decolonizing research as part of how we move through our collaborations. And so what we'd like to do is have a conversation in the breakout rooms, and Jennifer Severtson, Dr. Severtson has created a Google post, or sorry, I'm messing it up now. Do you want to describe that part, Jennifer?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. This is something that I just learned about, and it's totally optional, but we wanted to put that out there. I don't know if anybody's used a Jamboard before. So it's an option through Google that basically makes an electronic space. So like if we had all been together and had a big board where we could write things on it or post sticky notes and collect all of our information, this is an electronic version of that. So Catherine Rodriguez has posted the link, and hopefully technology cooperates in that it is open to anybody who opens up that link. And so we want to invite you to share the questions that you have about how do we approach our research and really begin to rethink what we're doing and rethink how we can address these structures of violence and racism. We just had a really inspiring talk, and so we wanted to create this open space that we can kind of reflect and think together on what are the big questions that we still have, what do we want to be thinking about, and what do we want to be thinking about going forward also into tomorrow's agenda as we hear even more talks and attend workshops and other lectures related to health disparities work. So if you want to check it out, click on the link, and we would love to collect your questions or any thoughts and feedback that you want to share in that forum.
Thank you, Jennifer. So we're going to break out into 3 rooms just till 4:30, and then we'll come back and debrief on what we talked about in the rooms. So when you go into the rooms, you will assign someone to be the reporter who will come back and report. And we have 3 moderators for the room. One is Dr. Syvertson. Another is our fabulous Michelle Burrows. And the other is our other fabulous Yolanda Moses. So Dr. Moses. And Catherine, do we have the 3 rooms options up?
Yes, we're about to open the rooms.
Okay. So Catherine's inviting you to a room, so go ahead and join, and we look forward to the conversation.
Please let me know if you need to be sent again to the room.
In your group.
Hi everyone, I can go first. I was in group 3 and Michelle Burrows was our facilitator. We had a great conversation about academia and diversity. And so some of the things that we talked about was, one, what are the barriers for students? What are the barriers for faculty? How does the institution contribute to reestablishing the way it is, that it doesn't facilitate diversity or allow inclusion of different perspectives? How does the research industrial complex in general do that with reviewers and panelists and things like that, where it just regurgitates the same things? How can we support our students? And what can we change the institution? What are the things that we should be doing to encourage that change? So those are just a little bit about what we talked about. I can keep going unless anybody wants to, if there's something that key point I missed. Thank you.
I'd like to piggyback on that. In our group, we talked a lot about the institution being a mitigator against the kinds of thinking outside the box and acting outside of the box that we might want to do, like our speaker talked about. And it was Anne that came up with this question that I was just typing on a chat note when I was interrupting. But it's, how do we exist within the structures that prevent us to work differently? We want to work differently, but we're within a structure that says this is the appropriate way to do it. For example, if we wanted to take a clinic into a community because the community doesn't feel safe coming to the campus, can we do that? And what are the barriers to that? And it fits the mission of what we want to do, but the institution is saying, oh, well, no, you can't do that. What do we do? How do we use this as our platform to do that kind of transformational work when the platform itself is basically holding us down, the institution? I don't have an answer.
I was just going to say that's a great question. Does anybody want to respond?
Part of, there was a little pushback because I was like, can we just be outside of the institution and do something different? But part of it was because I was thinking about, sometimes we see faculty go up and they've published in a different journal, because a lot of our newer colleagues are creating their own journals because the other journals are not doing it. They're not publishing the things that are important to us. And, it's all the problems that we talked about in our group, who actually gets to sit in the journals and direct what's getting done. And so they start their own journals, but then when they go up for review, it's like, well, this journal doesn't have over 100 issues. And so, do we count it or not? And so for us to intentionally push back on those moments when we do create something new that maybe is still part of the institution, but it's really reflecting the ways that we're trying to dismantle or decolonize research. And then the other piece is for journals that do exist already to really be intentional about changing their boards. So, I just got put on the Literature and Medicine Journal editorial board, and it's mostly been English professors, but they opened it up now to anthropologists, historians, to be able to bring in different voices. And so, I think there's more that we can do outside, with the community, as Rupa was talking about, and then bringing it back in. I don't know. That's what I was thinking about.
This is related to part of our discussion in our group as well. So I wondered if, Sophia, did you want to share a little bit about how we were talking about your methods and sort of the community piece, the community importance within research?
Sure. So we had talked about continuing to get feedback from the community, working with the community since the research center is already doing those things, and then also focusing on disseminating findings in a more tangible and like almost like a product for the community to use how they see fit, whether that is through story maps, whether that is through photo voice or photo ethnography, some form of medium that the community can have and the community can utilize and they can use as tools for their support or whatever concerns they want to raise awareness of. So I know that was something that came up in our group. Yeah, we kind of took a lot of different turns. I think our group also talked about the presentation and how in our current roles, how kind of the ideas that were coming out of it. And so a lot of it was also looking at utilizing community leaders to help fill in those gaps of distrust. How do we build that trust? How do we lessen our biases? Since we all have biases, it's not something that's going to go away, but how do we lessen and recognize and be more conscientious of those biases? And then we also talked about, in relation to the presentation, a lot of what changing the landscape would look like and how these small changes and incremental changes are more important, or at least a good starting point than not actionizing at all. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. We all talked about wanting to have, if we're able to, these, backyard farms and growing food, thinking differently, and getting chickens, things like that.
And we can start a food exchange.
Yeah, exactly. right? How do we work outside of these kinds of systems? I loved how she talked about, you know, growing the food and then working outside of the capitalist system to actually distribute it.
And can we do it in Riverside County?
Mm-hmm.
And there may be people already doing it that we don't know about it. So we could see, right?
Well, I think I was so impressed too with, you know, how they're buying back the land, you know, and returning it to the indigenous people. And I think about the UC system and UCR, Berkeley, and Davis in particular, right? Because we're land grant institutions. We stole this land to build a university on it. And so, you know, what is our obligation beyond a land acknowledgement? What is our obligation to restore, to decolonize?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would be worth a conversation with the former farmers of this region too, right? To see what was going on prior to colonization of Southern California, because it's another whole ecosystem from Northern California. But maybe the casinos might be interested in something like that, and they do have some bucks. If we wanted to buy some land to do some things, just saying. There's my, you know, I don't know how they got the land. Maybe it was a gift, or they probably did have to buy it, I'm sure.
Just wanted to add something from the medical education standpoint. And sitting here listening to all of this, and I'm thinking, how do I take this back to our medical students? How do we begin the story before they get out? And, you know, everything is so complex. One of the ideas that comes to me is, you know, could we, as part of our training, do we even begin to add, you know, growing your own food as a prescription? Do we begin to have that conversation right away? Is that something that could be included as a management plan, right? As you begin to talk to our patients that, hey, you can, we acknowledge the privilege of owning land, because we also have to have that conversation. Not everybody has access to land, but can you do something small in your space, you know, in a pot or whatever, as your means of control, right? This is the one thing that I own that I can care for. I mean, could we, I'm sitting here thinking, how can we bring this into that education space as we talk to our students before they become physicians and have to deal with the complexity of everything.
I just want to add one thing. Sorry, I was on interpretation services earlier. One thing that we could do is, you know, educate our students on the fact that we have a garden on our campus. We also have high rates of food insecurity, incredibly high rates of food insecurity among our student population, as well as, I don't know what the rates are among our staff or faculty, but, you know, does the university have a responsibility to, we are a land grant university, and that's incredibly important. We have agricultural fields, we have a garden, we have one farmer, and that farmer is overworked. So, you know, what can the university do? Is there something that the university could do, that we could do within this context to use the lands that we have available within our university system in a way that could really benefit our campus community, and particularly those who are in need of better access to food?
And there is a sustainability program that we have on campus too. And the director is someone who's very interested in agriculture. And so I think there could be some synergy.
Some universities have community gardens, also little plots of land, and get students, a lot of grad students at Purdue just love doing that as a way to supplement their food productivity. And if it could be engaged with education about these issues of health and nutrition and the land and the health of the land, that could be a very interesting and creative course someone might develop sometime, or activity with the community.
Yeah, those are all great ideas, and starting the conversation, like Sam Ying said, between HDR, School of Medicine, cafe, people who are working in the R garden, that could be a very productive place to start. Did we hear from all of the groups? Was everybody able to debrief, or did we miss one of the groups?
No, we only had 3.
And so everybody debriefed?
I think I'll say, I want to know how she does all that. As one person. That was one of the things we talked about. It seems like oh my goodness. And then, you know, we said she is an expert at forming partnerships with people and leveraging her work with other people of like mind and building those relationships. And I thought, that is a skill. That is a skill. And it's not one that we're taught as researchers necessarily. But it could be one that we help to promote in this program, because we know that's how our work is going to be disseminated and multiplied out there.
Exactly. Tanya, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thanks for that comment, Yolanda. I also was struck by the number of partnerships. And so I started paying attention to her language. And, you know, she always used the term we. She named her partners and the groups and communities with whom she was working. She used the term, we're developing a shared plan, shared ideas about, or shared understanding. And I was really struck by that. And I think that's very valuable. And for me, it's a model I'd like to, you know, try to follow more about, you know, just how we talk about, particularly for people in academia, how we talk about what we're doing, not only to ourselves and to each other, but also everywhere, I guess, you know, so when we're sharing with the broader world. That is all. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Carlos, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to throw in something. Ajwa, my co-director for the Health Equity, Social Justice, and Anti-Racism thread, and I've been discussing lots of different things. And one of the issues that hit me is that the medical school, and maybe all of UCR, should be helping to try and help students become better future change agents. And in fact, I've just sent in a proposal to Ajwa just earlier this week, outlining roughly establishing a health equity change agent certificate program within the School of Medicine, so that in fact students would carry on a set of things, not too onerous because I know how busy they are, but do a set of things oriented toward changing how in your future career do you change structures, do you change practices, are you able to decipher these things, and have medical school actually be a place that not only produces physicians, just health equity change agents. Don't know if it'll fly or not, but I just want to say that many of the comments I've heard here suggest that preparing to bring about change is a skill, and maybe a teachable skill. Signing off.
That sounds amazing.
Does anybody have comments on that? It's amazing. Gotta get it off the ground, Jennifer. So we'll see. It's just in its rudimentary stages of my ideas, but I just think this is so. My goal is not, in working with the school, is not simply to produce physicians 4 years from now, but produce change agents 20 years from now. I'm sorry to say, there are no metrics on that. Part of this is blind faith that we're doing this payoff 20 years from now, but we need some blind faith.
So I just want to comment, like, that's really amazing. And I think our School of Medicine, the students there's so many change agents, but what I hope is that there are opportunities like this, Carlos, and what you're suggesting in terms of creating these pipelines for them to have the structure set into place so that they can realize this creativity. Because often students, they are also constrained by the institutions that they're in. So, you know, I'm excited to think that there could be this push for these students in the future to have the skills here, to develop those skills, because we have the students, I believe, who are interested in the School of Medicine because of the mission, and to really provide them the support and the infrastructure to be able to grow like that.
And to be rewarded. So a certificate would show that.
Well, I'm thinking, Yolanda, that if in fact, and I think it's happening, more and more institutions across the country, including hospitals, medical centers, things like that, put a premium on diversity, but they're not quite sure how to do that.
Yes.
Getting people who actually come out with skills to make those kinds of changes, it should be not only a reward, it could be a real bonus when they're applying for their careers down the line.
Agreed.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tanya's comment about how language is powerful, training change agents, you know, not just physicians, but, you know, really thinking long-term about tackling these really big issues. We're about at our time. Does anybody have any last questions or comments that you want to share before we close out for the day?
I just want to say this was a terrific day and a terrific conversation. You know, I feel like we're all walking away with bits of things that we can do and, you know, and become change agents. And so, you know, thank you so much for engaging and being together and hearing different voices and really thinking about what we're doing. So, yeah, great discussion. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I really enjoyed today, and thank you for all of your participation.
Thank you for organizing us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
And more to come.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. This is wonderful.
So we'll see you all tomorrow, right?
Yes.
See you tomorrow.
Have a beautiful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.